It's always a pleasure to follow the Earl of Caithness, who has such expertise in the natural world. It's also a pleasure to see the Secretary of State here with us today, and I hope he's listened to the debate, but I don't think he has very much so far. I think we should separate him from the noble Lord Viscount Ridley, if the government wits could do that. Now, I would very much like to say, well done. I would very much like to say that I welcome this document. I mean, in a sense, I do welcome it, because the government appears to be thinking in the right terms. But for me, there are two huge flaws which I think you have to put right before you take this any further. I'm really happy to give you the Green Party's manifesto for a sustainable society, which should put you on the right track if you're interested. The first thing is, there's just not enough legislation in here. There's barely any. You cannot talk in these fine terms if you don't say exactly how you're going to bring it into being. So that, for me, is a big flaw. Secondly, this plan talks about the effects of climate change and how to deal with them, but it does not talk about the causes of climate change and how to deal with them. So what you're talking about is damage limitation. It's how to manage damage and decline, and we can't allow that. We just don't have the time. And of course, as well, the government's already in breach of a lot of its environmental commitments. Climate Earth has taken the government to court on air pollution and won the argument in court. It's also taken repeated threats from the EU for the government to do anything about cleaning up our polluted rivers. The government does not have a very good track record of delivering on the environment, and that just doesn't wash when you have a 25-year environment plan. I could have written the executive summary to this plan myself. I thought it was very good, the summary. But the bill itself is just so lacking. It's so lightweight. It is, for me, such a missed opportunity. I know that much of this 25-year plan is thanks to the work of the Natural Capital Committee. That committee has recommended that the plan should be based on a statutory footing. So I've got 4 questions for the Minister today, and if the Minister can't answer me today, then perhaps in writing. The first question is, when or if is the government going to commit to incorporating the plan into statute? That's incredibly important. DEFRA have said that they will legislate when needed, but the government's intention seems to be to legislate in dribs and drabs, with no coherence. The odd bill here and this odd statutory instrument there. It's just a very weak approach. Now, the Secretary of State does seem to have a genuine interest and care for the environment, but ministers move post, enthusiasm wanes and reality bites, and sometimes it's difficult to get legislation through Parliament. So we need to move fast on getting an Environment Act in place so that all these aims and ambitions are turned into real law while we have the political will. On natural capital, the 25-year plan makes a lot of that, and it's very welcome. It's something that environmentalists have been talking about for decades. But I'm worried it will go down the same path as David Cameron's commitment to make national well-being a key economic indicator and a central part of decision-making. That idea seems to have died a death. We don't hear about it anymore. And it just shows that these lovely ideas are completely useless if you don't put them into legislation. So if the government is serious about natural capital, they should put the Natural Capital Committee on a statutory footing with powers to scrutinise legislation and assess its impact on nature's commonwealth. Now, it's impossible to go through this debate without mentioning Brexit, and I won't rehearse my speech for tomorrow or Wednesday. But I do think the government needs to heed the fact that it must get its legislative proposals in order and fast. I think these gaps have got to be filled before the committee stages of the bill. Otherwise, there's no option but for us to start putting forward, your Lordship's House must put forward amendments that put these things into the bill. And so please, can the Minister commit to publishing legislative proposals urgently so that we're not forced to try to put stopgaps in? The plan also proposes to embed a principle of environmental net gain in the planning system. And we all know that nature is a very complex system and it's not easily replaceable. And so environmental gain net gain can't be allowed to be an excuse for developers to ruin one area and replace it with something that, for example, plant orchids or something, a couple of miles away. That just doesn't wash. I was on a council where they took away a substantial chunk of land and then gave back the same area of land, but it was in tiny little squares and triangles all over the council area, and that just was not good enough. The RSPB has been mentioned today, and they have expressed concerns that net gain must be based around a three-step mitigation hierarchy. First of all, that developments must first and foremost avoid any impact. Just avoid the impact. If it does happen, then they must mitigate those impacts. And thirdly, and only in exceptional circumstances, they must compensate where biodiversity or environmental impacts cannot be avoided. There are some irreplaceable habitats. We've heard about, for example, ancient woodland. Once lost, they cannot be replaced. They are inappropriate for this concept of net gain. Amazing how quickly time goes. Plastic. We really have to do something about this quickly. Something the government could do almost immediately is a deposit system on plastic bottles. Please, are we going to see that? Recycling. I'm incredibly concerned about recycling at the moment. We are struggling, the recycling market is struggling with low oil prices, which means it's much better to produce new plastics than use recycled, which of course is an absolute disaster. So I would like to know as well, is it true that the UK government's been lobbying against EU recycling targets? And what representations have been made to the EU on those targets? I'm very concerned that we are not ambitious enough in our recycling targets. On air quality, I'm proposing to bring a bill before your Lordship's House on clean air, and I very much hope it will get general support. There are many Green voices in this chamber. I don't claim to be the only Green Party member here. I'm not the only Green voice, and I do hope the government will be listening to these Green voices and hear the critique of this 25-year plan and the way that we can improve it and make it a real environmental plan and not just fine words.